Welcome to the Digital Egghead lesson on menus. In this lesson, we're going to talk about all the various menu items and some of the options that are found within them. Now, there are an immense amount of options found within the Photoshop menu, so we can't cover them all in detail. Some of them warrant having their own lessons as a whole to really cover what those particular options can do. But we'll at least acknowledge and touch on each one of the options in each one of the menu items. The first menu item that we come to is File. Under File, you'll find some of the most basic items that you find under any program or anything that you work with. Things such as New, which will start a new document where you could specify a lot of the different things ahead of time, which you want the document to be called, the size, and various other things. Then there is Open, which is going to open a pre-existing document or image that you want to start working on. Then we have Browse and Bridge. Bridge is Adobe's digital asset management app. It's kind of a way to manage all your files across all of your Adobe applications or programs. It allows you to really just kind of manage and sort and organize everything in one location within Adobe's ecosystem. Then we have Open As, and Open As just allows you to open Photoshop documents as different types of things, like Smart Object, which has its own menu item. You can open up a Photoshop document as a Smart Object specifically. Then we have Open Recent. Open Recent just keeps a list of documents that you've been working on recently. It's quick access to those. Then we have Close Document, which we'll just close the active document that you're working on. You can also click on the X here. If you have multiple windows open, like we talked about in the last lesson, you can close all, and that'll close everything that's open. You can close what you're working on and go to Bridge if you are ready to move to another program such as Lightroom. You can save your document, just standard Photoshop. You could save as, which will save it as various different formats. You can revert, and what revert does is, rather than going back through all of the history and stepping back one item at a time, it will revert it back to the last point that the document was saved. You've got Export. Export gives you a variety of options of what you want to export your document as. You've got Generate. Generate has one thing here, and it's called Generate Image Assets. This is a really great and really powerful tool, and I think this one really deserves its own lesson, and I'll talk about that a little more in detail at another time. But the basics of it is that you can set up your layers, like I have this one as divider.gif, and I have a logo.jpg, and simply by adding file extensions, Photoshop will automatically generate those layers as files. So I have this logo, which you can see goes right here, and it's its own layer, and if I have it generate the asset, it'll save this logo as logo.jpg in its own in a folder of generated assets. It's a really neat tool. Then we have Share on Behance, which is Adobe's social sharing platform. Same thing as you see down here in the lower left of your document. It's a way for you to share with the Adobe community the work that you do. Search Adobe Stock. This is relatively new for Adobe, and this is included in more than Photoshop. It's Illustrator and other image editing software that Adobe provides, but it's their own stock image site. You can and it's just like any other stock image site. You pay for the images, you can do subscriptions. It has the added convenience of being located right here within Photoshop or Illustrator or anything else. If you click this link, it'll take you to the website, but there are spots in Photoshop's interface where it kind of integrates, making it a little more streamlined. Place Embedded and Place Linked are two different ways to work with smart objects, and you can place embedded smart objects within your file, or you can link to other files. And I guess it doesn't have to be smart objects, but it's just a way to place other things that you're working on within the file that you're currently working on. If you place a linked file, then you have a separate file that you can work on, and any changes that are made in that file, which is called the source file, will be represented in this new document that you're working on that links to it. The advantage of that is that you can keep your assets separate, but you do have to edit them within their own source files rather than being able to do it directly within here. So it's kind of a give and take. It just depends on what works best for you at the time. You've got automate, and automate is a whole. It's another one of those things that really needs its own lesson. There are a lot of different things that you can automate. Between automate and scripts, actually, these are ways to speed up processes which you would do regularly or routinely, and make it so that you can do it a lot quicker rather than going through several steps. You can automate things into 1 or 2 steps and make it happen a lot quicker. Importing, there's only a few different things that Photoshop can import here. Video frames can be imported into their own layers. Notes and WIA support. File info, this is simply information about the file that you are currently working on. This particular file I have open doesn't really have a lot of stuff in it, so there's nothing populated here. But if you have a photograph that you've taken and it's got a bunch of metadata built into it or other data, it'll show all that stuff here. And then we have print and print one copy. Print will open the Photoshop print dialog and give you the options that you need to work with in order to print your image. And print one copy will just simply print it without opening the dialog and use settings that you've already got in place. And that's it. Exit's the last thing on there, but that's a high level overview of what's under the File menu. And next we have the Edit menu. There's a lot of stuff within the Edit menu. Just like the File menu, I'm only going to touch on a few things, or I'll touch on everything, but just lightly. Almost everything in the whole Photoshop menu layout has got either multiple ways to do it, shortcuts on ways to do it, or just really needs more in-depth explanation to make it make sense. Okay, so in the Edit menu, the first things we have are the basic undo, step forward, step backwards. What that is, undo is what everybody knows. You've done something, you undo it, and it's done. It goes backwards. Step forward and step backwards utilizes the history that the Photoshop palette has for you. So if you look over in the Histories palette, which I have open right now, I've got a few things over here, and you can see this is kind of the log of all things that I've done to this file recently. The last thing I did was a deselect. And if you do your edit, step backwards, you'll see that on there it just steps back by 1, step backwards again, edit, step forwards, goes forward. And that's all there is to that. The next section is, you've got a fade. The fade command applies to when you do Photoshop effects or filters, adjustments. You could do, so like if I grab the logo here and I do an adjustment, we'll just do a hue and saturation adjustment, and you can see clearly that has changed the color. The fade just allows you to kind of tone it down, the actual adjustment. So maybe I don't want it to be that drastic, so I bring that adjustment back just a little bit, and that way you can control the adjustment specifically. Now I'll go back and undo that. The next section is the cut, copy, paste section. This is standard word processing type of things. Cut will cut an element out and put it on the clipboard, and you can paste it in somewhere else. Let's do an example real quick. Go to the image, do a marquee. I apologize if I do a lot of shortcuts and you guys don't know what I'm doing. I'll try to do shortcuts only when it doesn't really make that much of a difference. In this case, I'm just doing the marquee, and I'm going to cut this out. So we'll do edit, cut, and now that's gone there. If we go to paste, it'll paste what I've got, what I just cut. Okay. And then we've got copy. If I wanted to do the same thing, I could do edit, copy, except not cutting it out. Now I can paste another one. So now I have two. I can undo that. Then we have copy merged. That's an interesting and useful tool. What copy merged will do for you is if you select a section of things, now if you just do copy, it's going to copy what you have, what layer you currently have selected. So right now I have that image layer selected, image 1. So if I go edit, copy, and then edit, paste, it's only going to paste that image because that's the layer I was on. If you do copy merged, it'll copy everything that's on those layers, basically merging them together. So now if I paste, I have a a merged version of what I just copied. Okay. Then you have a few special options for pasting. Paste in place is going to paste it exactly in the same place that you copied it from. So if we get rid of the marquee and we go edit, paste in place, you can see it's right on top of where it was. It's 1 pixel off here, but essentially right on top of where the other one is. So we'll throw that one away. Now with the other two options, a little bit interesting. So we have paste into. What paste into does, it'll paste into the selection area that you have. So we'll make an area here and paste into that, and it pastes it inside the selection area, and it creates a layer mask, which we'll talk about later too. But now there's a layer mask around this. So if we were to move that image outside of the area, you can see it'll disappear because it pastes it into this mask. And if we do the exact opposite, paste outside, it'll create the inverse of that map. So the image will actually be outside that box. So right now you can't see it because it's hidden behind it. But if we drag the image over, you can see it shows up now. So it's outside that selection. And there are a lot of different uses for that. And we can talk about those more maybe in another lesson, but it's a really cool and useful tool. Okay, so let's get back and undo all that. Okay, next item in here, we have check spelling, find and replace text. It's not something that you'll use a lot probably unless you're in a business where you've got to put a lot of copy into your Photoshop document and actually check it there. That doesn't usually happen though. If you're in a business, you've got other people who are checking your copy before you get it. But these are standard, word editing type of things. Fill and stroke. Fill will fill the area you've selected. So you select this and you fill it. It'll just fill it with whatever you've got selected. So I've selected a gray color. Okay, and there's that. Stroke, we'll put a stroke around the box. However thick you want the stroke to be, you select that, inside, center, outside. Check your options, and then there's a stroke. We'll get rid of that. Oh, you can't really see the stroke because I made it gray. But we'll do that again. Make a stroke around that box. 4 pixel stroke. There we go. And now you can see there's a 4 pixel stroke there. And That's all on the same image layer that I've got here. So you gotta be careful about that. If you're gonna make things like that, you want to make sure you're doing it on the layer that you want it to be on. So we'll go back and undo that. Now the next section, this is one of those sections that really needs to be delved into a lot deeper. But these are some really cool tools: content aware scale, puppet warp, perspective warp, and the free transform and transform are basic tools, but the first three are really powerful tools. So essentially what the content aware scale will do is it'll allow you to take an image and scale it without scaling the important elements of the image, such as buildings or people. So for instance, if we wanted to scale this image, we needed it to be just a little bit smaller. We didn't want to cut anything out of the image. We just wanted to shrink it in, but we don't want her to look weird or squished in. So we could use the content aware scale and keep her the same size while squishing in the bench and trees. The puppet warp is really amazing. The puppet warp allows you to essentially put a mesh around certain objects and change them and move them around in any way you want. Really hard to describe, but we'll try to do a lesson on that one another time. Perspective warp can change your point of view. Like if you're a photographer and you've taken a photograph from a specific perspective, but you realize that you really wanted it to be shifted maybe to the left a little bit, you can actually change your photograph so that it looks like you were standing 50 feet to the left, or higher or lower or whatever. It's really neat thing. Free transform and transform are the basic: scale, rotate, skew, distort. These are the things that just change and manipulate your image in the ways that you've seen since the beginning of time. Free transform is just no constraints. You can do whatever you want with it. Align and blend your layers. Define, so the definition section here, you can define brush presets that you like to use a lot. You can define a pattern. This is where if you were going to fill a pattern, we'll talk about that also another time. But if you're going to fill a pattern, you would want to define it first. For instance, these eggs down here, I set these as a pattern, and then I use the fill to fill it with my egg pattern. Let's see. And then define custom shape. Alright. And then the purge section is just clearing out any histories and caches. And here's a preset section for PDFs and other presets. Remote connections is a tool that you can use to connect to other devices or other services. As a basic thing, you could connect to presets you have set on your iPad or your tablet and have them connect here through the remote connections. And the next section is just settings, profile settings. This is all to do with colors, color profiles, and this is really more of like a photographer type of thing. This is a very complex section if you get into this type of stuff. And then you have your keyboard shortcuts, menus, toolbar, preferences, and those are kind of the basics of setting up things that you want to set up within this program. So keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to go through a section on doing this, but this is where you can assign specific shortcuts, even see which ones are already out there. And then the menus, it utilizes the same interface as keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts and menus, they're both here within these tabs. This is all for assigning and defining. And the toolbar, you can do some customization on your tools here, which is these. And then we have preferences. And this is generally just all of the preferences that you would have for your workspace and working with Photoshop. All of these will take you to the same interface, and you can see all those same options right here, and scroll between them. Set your color themes. You can set there's a plethora of things in here that you can change to your liking. So that's worth exploring to figure out what it is you want all your preferences to be. Okay, and that's it for the edit section. And then next we have the image section. Under here you can find mode. This is where you choose if you want a bitmap, grayscale, RGB, CMYK, how many bits per channel. Generally, especially for beginners, you're going to be working mostly in RGB and having the 8 bits per channel. That's the basic setup and default. Then you got adjustments. There's a lot of adjustments in here as far as the brightness and contrast levels and curves. These are all just exposure. These are all ways to adjust your image for saturation and vibrance and just a lot of different things. Adjustments is also going to be something that needs its own section to really show what it can do. Photographers really use a lot of the adjustment type of things to get their images to look exactly the way they want them to. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. Auto tone, contrast, and color. These are Photoshop's way of kind of guessing what it thinks you want the tone, contrast, and color to be. So if you don't want to go through and spend time trying to fine tune it, you can take your image and do an auto tone, and Photoshop will apply its algorithms to automatically make the tone even and what it thinks you want. Same for contrast and color. Sometimes you can start with an auto tone, contrast, and color and then fine tune it from there. Image size, canvas size. These are things you'll use a lot, and it's important to understand the difference. The image size specifically changes the actual image that you're working on. The canvas size changes the canvas and not the image. As an example, if we change this image size that I'm working on to, let's say, 800 wide, and I'll leave it linked, this little link here, make sure that you keep your proportions the same. So change it to 800. It's going to change my entire image down to 800 wide. Now, the canvas size, if I want a bigger canvas but don't want to change the actual images, I can change the canvas size. Say I want it a little bit bigger. We'll make it 2200 wide and 1200 high. There we go. So now we have a bigger canvas, and you can fill in the background or pattern it or whatever you need to do with the background, but that doesn't change the image size itself. Okay, let's undo that. Then we have image rotation options, standard options. You can rotate your image 90 degrees, 180 degrees, however you want. You can flip the canvas to mirror it horizontally or vertically. Crop and trim, those are pretty standard to crop. This way, without using the tool, you would just use your selection tool. Select the area you want to crop it into, and then crop becomes highlighted. It'll crop down. And trim, what trim will allow you to do is just basically trim away certain pixels or transparency from the edges of the image. So let's go ahead and make our canvas a little bit bigger again. We'll make it 2000 wide. Now you can see we've got our images within this size, but we've got extra transparency around the edge. Maybe we don't want to try to crop it perfectly or cut it down to that or try to figure out the measurements on it. We just want to trim away the transparent pixels, and that's where you would use trim. So we go to image trim. This little options dialog pops up. You can trim by transparent pixels or certain pixel colors you have here, and which ones do you want to trim away. Maybe you only want to trim away the left and not the right. Once you hit OK, what you've chosen goes away. Next we have reveal all. What reveal all does is if you have some elements or items that are hanging off the edge of the canvas, kind of like that, and you want everything to fit within the canvas the way that it is, but without actually moving them back in, you would just simply do a reveal all, and Photoshop will resize your canvas to fit everything that you have. This can be helpful sometimes when you have things like drop shadow effects. Even maybe your image goes right up to the edge and you put a drop shadow on it, and now your drop shadow looks like it's cut off. If you reveal all, it'll expand the canvas to include your drop shadow effect. Then we have duplicate, apply image, and calculations. Duplicate will simply duplicate the file that you're working on. Make another copy and you can start making changes from there. Maybe you just want to preserve the one you've got the way it is and you're going to go off in a whole new direction and you want to come back to this one and do something else to it. The apply image command essentially lets you blend one image's layer and channel, which would be the source layer, with a layer and channel from your active image. So you would take another image and blend it into the one you're working on. And then the calculations command kind of does a similar thing. The calculations command lets you blend two individual channels from one source image, well, one or more source images, and then you can apply those to the active image that you're working on. So similar kind of thing. Then the last couple of things we have here, apply variables, data set, trap, and analysis, are all very complicated, complex tools that have specific purposes to specific industries. The trap tool is going to be mostly used for printing. It has to do with overlapping colors and making sure that they come out right. The variables is something that gets used for creating data-driven graphics. So that's a whole nother thing in itself. And the analysis menu is specifically for measuring, counting, and analyzing pixels in Photoshop. I think that pretty much covers the image menu. Okay, and next we have layers, or the layer menu. And I'm kind of realizing now that going through all the items like I have been could take a long time, and I don't want you guys to get bored. So I'm going to try to move a little quicker. If I glaze over something that you feel like is important or you want more explanation on, just let me know and I'll come back and add that in. But for now, I'm just going to try to quickly go through the rest. For the layers menu item, you have things that are directly pertaining to the layers themselves. So everything in here has to do with a layer. You got a new layer, you can do different layers, background layer, groups, layers, and that's going to add new layers over here. Copy CSS is a cool thing to take note of. If you're a web designer, you can copy the CSS for whatever layers you're on. Do that. It basically just puts the CSS on a clipboard, and then you can go into Notepad or wherever you're going to use and paste that CSS in there. Duplicate layer, simply duplicates layer on. Delete, deletes the layer. Let's see, quick export as a PNG or export as. This will export specifically the layer you're on as either a PNG or whatever you define you want. Then we have rename, layer style. Well, rename is self-explanatory, I believe. Layer style, just will apply one of these styles to the layer, which you can also do over there in the layers palette. You have smart filters, new fill layers, which will fill with either a solid color, gradients, or patterns. And got some masking options, layer mask, vector masks, and clipping masks. Smart objects, video layers. And a reason I want to kind of gloss over some of these right now is because I know that I'm going to come back to the more important ones in other lessons. But for right now, it's just getting your eyes on what's in here. So you have smart objects that you can either convert things into smart objects or do various different things with those. A smart object is essentially if you want to have an object, an object being an item in a layer or something that you want to retain its properties, you can convert it to a smart object and scale it down, scale it up, and it'll scale in percentages rather than simply just the size or the pixels, and you can always go back to the original. Video layers and rasterizing. Rasterizing will take your smart objects or vector objects and rasterize them. New layer based slice is for web design. We have this is a group layers, which is what we already did a little earlier in the layers palette. And ungroup, hide. You can arrange things forward and backwards if you want things to be in the front or the back, which you can also do in the layers palette. Combine shapes. A lot of this stuff you really would do in the layers palette anyways. Align layers to a selection. You can pick one thing that's selected or you can make a selection and then you can align all the layers to that selection. You can distribute, which is like all the same things you see up here at the top right now based on the move tool that I have selected. You can lock your layers. You can also do that by clicking on the padlock over here on the layers palette. You've got link layers. You can link your layers together. You can select certain link layers. You can merge layers, merge the ones that are just visible. This would be to all of them. You can flatten the image, basically just taking all your layers and combining them into one layer. And then matting options here. Okay, I know that one was quick. Like I said, if there's anything you want to know specifically more about, let me know and I'll be happy to come back and add that in there. Next we have the type menu option. This all has to do specifically with your type, your fonts. You can add them from Typekit, which is a great tool that Adobe has, much like the stock imagery, which has now been combined into Adobe's interface. They have their own font tool, which is called Typekit, and they provide web-based fonts or desktop fonts, all of it, and you can download them, most of them, and put them on you can put them in your system so that you can work with them in your files, and then you have lots of options of things you can do with it from there. An example here would be, let's see, if I open this up, these are all my fonts that I have available, and certain ones have the little Typekit logo or icon, and those are ones that came directly from Adobe. And then we've got the different panels that you could want to use or see. You've got making your type anti-alias, orientation, and open type options. You can extrude a word or a letter or whatever type you have to 3D, which has a lot of different options in itself. You can create a work path for your type, convert your type to a shape, rasterize it. Type by nature is a vector object, and you can't do a lot of different effects and things with them unless you rasterize it. Warping and converting to point text. You have font preview size, so this is just a preview size, simple as that. Language options. These, if you're in other countries, you may want to take a look at what those can do for you. Updating all your text layers, replace missing fonts, resolve missing fonts. This is for sometimes you get a file from somebody else, or you have a file that you had on a different system and you had some fonts and now you don't. You'll open it. When you open it up, Photoshop will let you know right away, these fonts are missing. What do you want to do? If you don't want to update them or replace them, it will keep them looking the same unless you try to edit them. Once you try to edit them, then it will know you don't have that font, so it's going to try to find a substitution. Lorem ipsum, which you can see I have right here. It's a great tool for just putting placeholder type or placeholder copy in place, and they built a tool right in here to put some lorem ipsum in there. And then you can have your default type styles or save and set your default type styles. Then we have select options. These all have to do with your selections, such as your marquee boxes. When you come in here, you can have it select all, which is going to be everything in your canvas. Deselect, which you see me keep doing and I haven't explained why or how I'm doing it, and that's because I always use the Control D to deselect. So if I have a marquee box, it disappears and I hit Control D. Reselect if you deselected something you didn't want to, which could also be done through the history. Go back to the selection you had, and you can select all of your layers. You can see over here all the layers are selected. Oh, I realized I skipped over inverse. So if you've got a selection here and now I've got just this image area selected, I want the opposite selected, so I want to select everything but the image. I would select inverse, and you can see the little racing ants go around everywhere else. So all this is what's selected. You can deselect all the layers. You can find specific layers. You can isolate layers. Color range and focus area. Refining your mask, which would be your layer mask. If you put a layer mask on it, you may want to refine the mask itself. Modify your selection. This is where you can add borders, you can smooth out your selection, expand it, contract it, feather it. Quick example here, we'll go expand, so we've got it around the button a little bit there. We'll expand it, and you can choose how much. We want to expand this by 20 pixels, and now I've got a bigger selection. And you can do the opposite where you contract it, or you can feather, and feathering is basically blurring out the edges. So if I wanted to have kind of a blurred edge around it where it's not a hard line, that would be feathering. And the same thing with feathering, you can select how much you want to feather. 0 essentially being the hard edge, and the more you feather out, the more the edge will blur. And if we have grow and similar, and this is essentially if you've got you've used the magic wand or something and you've selected certain areas, growing it will just grow it out just a little bit, kind of selecting pixels that are similar right next to it. If you did similar, it would select the similar pixels all throughout the entire canvas. Transform selection is now if you want to just transform what you've selected. I don't actually have anything selected in here because I don't have any layers selected, but that's what that would do. If I wanted to just stretch and move, I would select that and transform that on that layer. And load and save, so you can save specific selections, and you can load so that you can load them later if it's a selection that you know you use frequently. Edit in quick mask mode, you can make a selection that you can come and edit with a quick mask. And then you can also select elements from your design to extrude in the 3D tools of Photoshop. Next we have the filter menu option, and I'm going to select the image layer here just to see better what the filter things can do. The first thing in there is the last filter, which is handy when you are applying the same filter to many different things frequently. It'll allow you to basically just do the thing you did last. Also Control F as the shortcut there. Convert for smart filters. Now, smart filters are something that help to create non-destructive changes to your layers. If you've got smart objects, which as I explained earlier are objects that retain their initial properties, you can always go back to that, and vector objects and things like that, smart filters will apply to those in a non-destructive way, meaning that they're not permanent and you can always update and adjust them. Filter gallery, this will give you the kind of a preview window of all the different filters in here. So it's quick and easy to come through and just see what would these filters do, before you actually apply them and see them. So you might want to do the color pencil one and then mess around with the different options here just to see how that's going to affect your image. And then you can apply it there if you want to. Adaptive wide angle. So this is a kind of a tool where you can adjust the angle and scale of your image. It's a little hard to explain, but you can kind of see what's happening here when you change your settings. You can choose different lenses per se for what you want this wide angle to do. The camera raw filter. You can use this with Smart Filter to enhance saturation, clarity, contrast, things like that without destroying your original camera raw file. This is really for heavy photo editing. Lens correction, if you've got different lens issues you want to correct, you can come in here and check out the options for that. Liquify is a tool that's been around in Photoshop for a long time. It essentially pushes your image around like as if it were liquid, just like that. So if it were wet paint, I guess would be a good way to put it. We have Vanishing Point, which you can use to create a vanishing point perspective in your image. Then you've got all the actual filters. 3D, blur filters, blur gallery, specific blur filters, distortion filters, noise. These are things that you really got to kind of play around with and just see what they do. There are a lot of really cool things, a lot of very different things. And there's other filters you can browse online. So that's the filter section. Now the 3D section, I'm not going to go through all the 3D options because these all really need to be gone through in a 3D tutorial specifically. Otherwise they're just not going to make a lot of sense. But if you would like to, you can go through now and just play around with it and see kind of what that does. The view section it really has to do with the way that you're looking at your artwork, your images. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it depending on what you need. Generally we're looking at it as a working CMYK, but these are all different ways for print specifically what you can look at. Pixel aspect ratio. You've got you can zoom in and zoom out. That's basic. You can also do that with your Control plus, Control minus, or as you can see, I've got this navigator window open, and you can do that here as well. And then fit it on the screen, fit the artboard on the screen, specifically 100% or 200%, print size. These are all ways to view your document. The rulers, which I touched on earlier, that's how you can get those to show up or go away. I usually just use Control R, Control plus R, or Option R. Apologize if I forget to say Option for the Mac users. I'm on a PC. You've got Snap and Snap 2. These are really helpful things to have in conjunction with your rulers. This will allow you to snap things together so without having to try to eyeball them. So for instance, if I have my guides out here, now maybe I've got one that I put over here, and then I've got my image and I want to move that, you can kind of see as I get closer it snaps to the guide or to the center of the document here or the center of the document there. You can see the pink lines or when I'm moving it around to show that it's snapping. So that's a really handy feature to have. And then you can lock your guides, you can clear them all out. If you don't clear them out and you want to get rid of some, you just drag them off of the screen. Show you that real quick. There's a guide, drag it away. I'm sure you noticed that my guides kind of disappeared a minute ago. I hit use Control H, that'll make them appear and disappear. So this whole section here all has to do with just controlling your guides and how you see them. For the web design side of things, these are your slices options that you can see, locking your slices or clearing out your slices. I don't have any slices currently created, so there's nothing that I can show you right there. And that's that for the view section. And then we have the windows section. The windows section has to do mostly with the windows that you have for your palettes and your active items and how you see those. You can, if you have several things that you have open, which I only have one currently, but if you have a bunch open, you can choose to have Photoshop automatically tile them all vertically or lay them out in any of these ways that you like, or cascade them or any of those. This is also how you could have them just float everything, like I have right here in a floating window. You can have Photoshop float everything if you had them all in tabs already. This is where earlier when I talked about the workspace, you can also see workspace options here, just like here. You can choose your workspace or reset it. Another way to get to the keyboard shortcuts and menus. We've got extensions, the Photoshop extensions. This is something where people develop extensions in Photoshop and I don't have any on this system, but I do have some that I like to use. And extensions are basically add-ons that do things that Photoshop doesn't already do. One of the things I have is called Gratify, and what that'll do is for the grids, or for the guidelines here, you can set up specific grids of spacing. Say I wanted this to be divided evenly into thirds, or I just want to have the outer edges of this without having to put my own guides out there, or however I want them. I can use that add-on to do that for me, or that extension to do that for me. And there's a lot of extensions out there, so that's worth taking some time to see what extensions have been created that could be useful to you. All these things in the next section here have to do with the palettes that you're seeing over here on the side. All the ones that are checked are the ones that I have open and visible to me right now. So you can see I have adjustments, that's checked, and that is right here. And I have, let's see, the navigator's checked. The navigator's right here. So all these checked items are over here. Some of them aren't checked but are out there, and that would be because they're in the tabs. So if I look here, I can see there's channels. Channels is not checked, but I do have it out here, right there. Now if I were to look at it, channels is checked and layers is unchecked. This is how you can get the things that you don't already have out into your palettes over here. So if I choose, I don't have 3D out there. So if I choose 3D, 3D just popped up down here. I can drag it out, or I can add it in as a tab in one of my other groups. And this is really where you see the power of being able to customize your workspace to however you like it. So now I've got 3D as a tab in here, if that made sense. Or I can make it its own other thing here, and you can just kind of add things in and out however you please. And then for each one of these menu items, I should point out that there are options. You can click in all these little 3-line menu looking things, and that's how you would also close it, or close an entire group. And then we have also options and tools down here, and then the thing at the bottom, it's only got one. It says PS Example 01. That's the file I have open. If I had more files open, this would get bigger, and then you can click on these. I'm not sure where that's actually useful, but it just lists out all the active files you have right there. Okay, and then last but not least, we have the help section. That is pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of different help things in here. Photoshop will tell you what's new. You can go onto their website, their support center, see about this version that you're using, various different things. This is also where you can log in and out of your account. So yeah, help and help tools are in that section. And that's everything for the menu lesson. Like I said, I kind of glossed over a few things there in essence to keep this kind of short and not mind-numbingly boring. If there's anything that anybody really wants to know more about, I can either do a specific lesson on it, or I can try to add it in here, whichever works, or I can even comment back. If you put a comment into the comment fields there, I'll respond to you with my answer. Okay, thank you again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.